August 17, 1944. Somewhere in the American Midwest, the rhythmic clatter of steel wheels echoed through the open plains as a U.S. Army train snaked across a sea of golden wheat. Inside, a group of weary German prisoners of war sat in silence, their field-gray uniforms dusty from the long journey. The air was thick with the smell of oil, iron, and uncertainty. Lieutenant Karl Brenner, 28, formerly of the Wehrmacht's 21st Panzer Division, pressed his face to the barred window. Beyond the glass, the world stretched endlessly, flat, fertile, and impossibly vast. He had fought through Tunisia, seen the ruins of Naples and the deserts of Libya. But this was different. Rows of barns stood like fortresses of wood and steel. Massive fields shimmered beneath the late summer sun. And at the edge of one property, Brenner saw something that made him sit upright. A tractor, if it could even be called that, thundered across the soil, belching smoke and dust. Its roar was deafening, like a bomber taking off. Mounted on its frame was a gleaming radial aircraft engine, its cylinders spinning with mechanical ferocity. "Was this us?" one of the soldiers muttered beside him. Brenner didn't answer. He didn't know. The American guard at the end of the car, chewing tobacco, caught the look on their faces and smirked. "Ain't seen nothing like that before, huh, boys?" he said, tipping his hat. "That's a Pratt & Whitney-powered plow. We got a few of 'em out here. Used 'em when the war cut off engine parts." Brenner looked back out the window, transfixed. The machine tore through the earth with mechanical precision. One man commanding what would have taken a dozen laborers back home. In Germany, even the wealthiest estates relied on horses or small diesel tractors. Here, the Americans were turning airplanes into farm tools. The realization sank in like a weight. This wasn't just abundance, it was power. As the train clattered past, fields gave way to small towns, their silos reaching skyward beside water towers marked with faded white stars. Children waved from dirt roads, their bicycles trailing behind them. To the German prisoners, the sight was both surreal and humiliating. They had been told America was a country of amateurs, soft, decadent, incapable of real war. But out here, in the heart of its farmland, they saw something different. A nation where engines, steel, and ingenuity were as common as soil. When night fell, the guards dozed, and the prisoners murmured quietly among themselves. Brenner couldn't shake the sound of that engine, the mechanical snarl of progress itself. For the first time, he began to understand how Germany could lose. Continue August 18, 1944, Camp Concordia, Kansas. The train slowed with a hiss of brakes and the rattle of coupling chains. A dust storm of wheat chaff and diesel exhaust swept over the tracks as the German prisoners disembarked under the watchful eyes of American MPs. The sun was merciless, bleaching the horizon to a white haze. Lieutenant Karl Brenner stepped down first, boots crunching on gravel. Around him, hundreds of POWs blinked in disbelief. The camp was no squalid prison yard like the ones Germany kept in France or Poland. This was something else entirely. Rows of neat wooden barracks stretched out in perfect symmetry, guarded by tall fences topped with barbed wire. Beyond the perimeter, the land rolled into open farmland, an ocean of green and gold broken by red barns and silver grain elevators. The smell of freshly turned soil drifted across the prairie, carried by the wind. A sergeant in a pressed khaki uniform called out, "Move it along, fellas. Welcome to Kansas. You'll be working before the week's out." The men exchanged wary glances. Working? Brenner knew from briefings that American camps often sent POWs to farms for labor, but he hadn't expected this scale. They were marched to the mess hall, where the first shock came. Dinner. Piles of mashed potatoes, beef stew, cornbread, even fruit preserves. Nothing fancy, but more than any frontline German unit had eaten in months. The men ate in silence, some ashamed, others suspicious. Later, Brenner sat outside, watching the sunset bleed into the plains. The hum of machinery filled the air, engines, generators, vehicles moving beyond the fence. The land never slept. That evening, an older guard named Corporal Ellis stopped near the fence with a cigarette. "You fellas will be working them farms soon enough," he said. "Ain't too bad. Beats fighting, don't it?" Brenner asked cautiously. "All this land, who owns it?" Ellis chuckled. "Mostly families. Been here generations. My pa's farm's 30 miles that way." He pointed west. "Ain't big by local standards. Only 600 acres. Brenner blinked. 600? In Germany, a family farm was 10, maybe 20 acres. "How many workers?" "Me, my brother, my old man, sometimes a hired hand." The German officer frowned. "Just 3? Ellis nodded. "Got the machines for it. You'll see." The next morning, Brenner saw. They were loaded into trucks. Green GMCs that rattled along gravel roads through an unending mosaic of farmland. At every turn, the prisoners saw new marvels. Tractors with giant steel wheels and roaring engines. Combines that swallowed whole rows of wheat. Barns filled with gleaming equipment stamped with names like John Deere and International Harvester. One farm had a converted Allison aircraft engine bolted to a massive tractor frame, the exhausts angled like cannon barrels. It sounded like a P-40 fighter roaring down a runway. The farmer, a stocky man in overalls, grinned at the awestruck Germans. "Built her myself," he shouted over the noise. "Used to be a surplus plane engine from the plant in Wichita. Too good to waste." Brenner's translator, a corporal named Vogel, muttered, "Mein Gott." With machines like this, who needs men? Brenner nodded slowly. This is why they never run out. Not men, not machines, not food. The convoy drove on through the endless fields. The prisoners stared through the truck slats, silent now. Each man privately wrestling with the same realization. That they were seeing not just America's farms, but the beating heart of its power. By the time they reached the worksite, the smell of aviation fuel and cut wheat hung thick in the air. The land itself seemed to hum with energy. For the first time, Lieutenant Brenner understood that Germany hadn't merely lost a war of soldiers. It had lost a war of engines. August 22nd, 1944. A wheat farm near Salina, Kansas. The morning light rolled across the prairie like a slow tide, gilding the wheat fields in molten gold. Dew steamed from the stalks as the prisoners began their first full day of work. The air buzzed with insects and with engines. Lieutenant Karl Brenner wiped the sweat from his neck and looked out across the fields. Half a mile away, an American farmer guided a hulking tractor across the land. The sound was unmistakable. The deep, chugging rhythm of an aircraft engine throttled for takeoff. The ground itself seemed to tremble. "Verdammt," one of the POWs whispered. "It sounds like a Messerschmitt." The farmer, whose name was Henry Collins, hopped down from the machine and gave a friendly nod. He was broad-shouldered, sunburned, and wore his cap tilted back with an easy confidence. His overalls were streaked with oil, his hands dark with grease. "Morning, fellas," he called. "Hope you don't mind the racket. Built this old beast myself during the war. Couldn't get parts for the old Case tractor, so I made do. Engines from a wrecked Curtiss plane. Ain't she a beauty?" Brenner and the others stared as Collins patted the machine, a Frankenstein's monster of American ingenuity. The cowling still bore the faded stenciling U.S. Army Air Corps. The exhaust pipes glowed faint red under strain. Collins motioned toward the sky. "We got them plants in Wichita cranking out engines day and night. When one's too rough for flying, we bolted on something else. Waste not, want not." The Germans exchanged glances. In the Reich, metal was rationed like bread. Here, they repurposed aircraft engines just to till soil. Brenner took a slow breath, tasting the dust. "How many machines do you have?" he asked through the interpreter. 3 tractors, 2 combines, and a truck," Collins said. All running. My wife handles one of the tractors while I'm out in the north field. She's a better driver than me anyway. Even that made Brenner pause. A woman operating heavy machinery? In Germany, that would have been unthinkable. The day stretched on. The prisoners hauled sacks, repaired fences, and loaded grain bins. But their eyes kept drifting toward the machines that roared across the horizon like mechanical beasts. At noon, Collins shared water and sandwiches with them under the shade of a cottonwood tree. He talked easily about crop yields, rainfall, and his 2 sons serving in the Pacific. We keep things moving here, he said. Army gets the food, we keep the fields running. Everyone pitches in. Brenner nodded, quiet. He had once believed German discipline, precision, and loyalty were unmatched. But here, in this strange new land, discipline took another form. A nation mobilized not by fear, but by capability. Every man, woman, and machine seemed woven into a single, tireless rhythm. When evening came, the last rays of sunlight turned the horizon crimson. The tractor's engine sputtered to a stop, steam hissing from its manifold. Collins wiped his brow, grinning. Well, boys, that's 20 acres today. Not bad for one man and a bunch of city fellas, huh? Brenner managed a faint smile. The American's humor wasn't mocking, just proud. As they were loaded back onto the truck, the German officer looked once more at the machine sitting in the field, its metal glinting under the dying light. It wasn't the weaponry or the numbers that haunted him. It was the simplicity, the resourcefulness, the ease with which this country turned the leftovers of war into tools for life. And as the truck rumbled down the dusty road toward Camp Concordia, Brenner realized that what he had witnessed was more than a farm. It was the soul of America, relentless, adaptive, and impossible to exhaust. He turned to Vogel and said quietly, Now I see why we lost, mein Freund. They fight with machines, but they live with them too. Vogel didn't answer. He just watched the darkening fields slip away behind them, the endless wheat glowing faintly in the twilight, whispering like ghosts in the wind. September 1st, 1944, Camp Concordia, Kansas. The Kansas sky stretched clear and merciless above the barracks. The wind smelled of hay and gasoline, carrying the far-off hum of engines from the farms beyond the wire. Lieutenant Karl Brenner sat on a rough wooden bench near the fence, his hands wrapped around a tin mug of weak coffee. It had been 2 weeks since the Germans began working the fields, and the shock of what they had seen had yet to fade. Every day they watched machines do the work of armies. Huge combines devoured the land, driven by men who seemed as casual about their power as they were about their lunches. Every spare part, every scrap of metal, every gallon of fuel was used and reused, all while new supplies rolled in by train and truck, unending. In Germany, Brenner remembered, factories were in ruins, farms starved of men and horses, women digging the earth with shovels. Here, the war barely touched them. Sergeant Collins had visited again that morning to pick up more POWs for the harvest. He leaned on the fence, smiling through a haze of dust. We'll finish the south field tomorrow, he said. Then maybe get a new rig in. The Army's sending us a surplus Allison engine. Bigger one, from a Lightning fighter. Brenner's lips parted. You use aircraft engines just for plowing? Sure do, Collins said. Ain't much difference between cutting through clouds and cutting through clay. He chuckled, clapping Brenner on the shoulder before walking off. The word stuck with him all day. When the sun fell, the camp lights flickered on, powered by a diesel generator that thudded steadily somewhere behind the barracks. The sound was comforting in its own way. The steady pulse of energy, of order, of plenty. Inside the barracks, the men whispered. Some mocked what they saw, calling it wasteful or crude. Others were quieter. If they can do this for food, one sergeant murmured, imagine what they can do for war. Brenner said nothing. He sat by the window, staring at the dark horizon. The truth had become impossible to deny. Germany's defeat wasn't just on the battlefield. It was in the factory, the workshop, the barn. The Reich had built tanks and rockets, yes, but at immense cost, with slaves and shortages and desperation. America, by contrast, had built abundance. He remembered the plains over North Africa, wave after wave of them, as if the sky itself were producing aircraft. He remembered the endless supply of fuel, the rations dropped by parachute, the trucks that never broke down. At the time, he had thought it arrogance. Now, he saw it for what it was: infrastructure, industry, civilization as an engine. Later that night, the guards played a radio near the watchtower. Music drifted through the air. Glenn Miller, bright and brassy. Between songs, a broadcast mentioned something about new aircraft carriers launched, new bombers rolling off assembly lines. The POWs listened in silence. Brenner whispered, almost to himself, "They build these things like we build bread." The young Corporal Vogel, lying on his bunk, stared at the ceiling. Then the war was over before it began. Outside, the wind rolled across the prairie, bending the wheat like a living sea. The rhythm of machinery echoed faintly through the night, a mechanical lullaby that seemed to stretch forever. Brenner closed his eyes, and in his mind saw again that first tractor, the one with the aircraft engine, roaring through the fields with the strength of 1,000 men. It wasn't just a machine, it was a revelation. In that moment, Lieutenant Karl Brenner understood something few captured soldiers ever admitted: that what he had seen in those American fields wasn't simply victory. It was destiny, forged in steel, fuel, and soil. September 10th, 1944. Camp Concordia, Kansas. The air was cooler now, autumn creeping across the plains. The wheat was cut, the silos full, and the POW's routine had settled into rhythm. Breakfast at dawn, trucks to the fields, work until the light faded. Yet the days had taken on a strange stillness. The laughter, the small talk, even the occasional songs that once drifted through the barracks had vanished. Lieutenant Karl Brenner spent most evenings staring through the barbed wire at the horizon, where the last glow of sunset bled into the land. The engines had become part of the background, not a marvel anymore, but a reminder. Every throb of machinery beyond the fence whispered a truth he could no longer ignore. One night, the guards allowed a few prisoners to attend a movie projected on a whitewashed wall. An American newsreel and a short film called The Miracle of Production. Grainy footage flickered to life. Endless rows of factory lines, women in overalls riveting airplane fuselages, men welding tank hulls, conveyors of ammunition rolling into freight cars. A calm, confident voice narrated, "Every minute, America builds another weapon. Every field, every worker, every machine is part of the fight for freedom." The Germans sat rigid, eyes reflecting the screen's light. When it ended, Brenner didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he whispered, "They make war like we make speeches." The other said nothing. Later, lying in his bunk, he thought of home, of his father's small farm near Koblenz. Horses pulling wooden plows, neighbors trading labor for bread, fuel rationed to drops. His father had once said, "Germany has discipline, America has luck." But Brenner knew now it wasn't luck. It was scale. And something deeper. Faith in machinery, in process, in abundance. A belief that effort, multiplied by steel and electricity, could conquer anything. Days turned into weeks. The prisoners were sent to other farms, some even helping repair engines. Brenner often found himself working beside American mechanics who taught by example. A wrench here, a spark plug there. No shouting, no cruelty, just work. One afternoon, while helping grease a gear assembly, Brenner asked quietly, "Why so much trust? You let us handle your machines." The mechanic, A man named Tom shrugged. You break it, we fix it. You steal it, we've got 10 more. He grinned, wiping his hands. That's the difference, Lieutenant. You folks were fighting for glory. We're fighting for work, and work don't run out. That night, Brenner wrote in a small notebook the guards had allowed him to keep. September 15th. I understand now. Machines are not tools here. They are the people's language. Every engine, every tractor, every assembly line speaks the same word. Endurance. As weeks passed, rumors trickled in. Of Allied landings in the Philippines, of the Red Army pushing west. The war was turning, and everyone knew it. One evening, as the wind swept across the flatland, carrying the smell of diesel and cut corn, Brenner stood with Vogel near the fence. The lights from the fields glowed faintly in the distance. They'll win soon, Vogel said. And when we go home, what will we tell them? Brenner didn't answer right away. He watched as a tractor far away flickered under the moonlight, its engine firing in perfect rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. We'll tell them, he said finally, that we saw the future, and it runs on gasoline. The two men stood in silence, listening to the mechanical hum roll over the plains. It was the sound of a nation that had already moved beyond the war toward something larger, a kind of peace built not on conquest, but on creation. And for the first time since his capture, Lieutenant Carl Brenner felt no anger, only awe.